Hi, welcome to Starr of Appalachia podcast. I have my new friend, Stephen Bradford Long, with me today. Stephen and I both live in Appalachia in the mountains of North Carolina, and we were both on Substack and follow each other. And we recently met for coffee and discovered that we have a bunch of stuff in common. And one of the things we have in common is that we have experience with intense edgelord communities. And that's what we're going to be discussing today.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
so
Yeah,
Stephen, tell everybody about yourself.
sure. So I am a generalist who writes about all sorts of things. Um, Lately, I've been writing quite a bit about masculinity and men, but I also write about mental health. I write about LGBT issues. I write about cultural issues, and a common theme is in my work is also religion and spirituality. And I have done my time in some edgy communities. And I'm still a bit of an edge lord, but deep in my heart. But I've put some restraints on that for reasons that we'll get into.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel like first we should define edgelord. Some of our listeners might not be, if they're not chronically online, they might not know what that term means.
Yeah. So so I think that edge lordism, and this is drawing from my own experience in various communities, is a sort of symbolic warfare, right? Or linguistic warfare, where um, the communities that I was part of were very really very pacifist, right? Strong belief in nonviolence, but there was a sort of symbolic aggression and using symbols that were very dear to people, inverting them or weaponizing them to raise everyone's blood pressure and
Mm-hmm.
to make a point. And sometimes the point was a very good point. Sometimes it wasn't a good point, but I see it as a being a provocateur,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm on the fence. For me, it's really a case by case basis as to whether it's helpful. There's some forms of being a provocateur, which is really just getting a rise out of people, using something that is dear to someone, or attacking someone's character, or whatever the case may be, to provoke a response. And it's like the cat on the counter just batting things off of the
Yeah.
off of the counter. Well, the cat does that
Yeah.
because it gets an interesting response from you where you go, "Oh my god, stop it." Like
Yeah.
that that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the provocateurship is the provocativeness is just for that response because it's an interesting response, and it gets and people who are into this go like, "Oh, that's very interesting. Look at that. This person is having an interesting response." And then sometimes it is also uh, for a particular cause, for a particular political cause or ideological cause, and yeah, I'll stop talking there and see what you think of that.
Well, I think that's a good working definition. I was going to do something that was I was thinking along the lines of something that was probably a lot simpler and maybe dumber, which is that edge lords are people who have fringe beliefs, but um, also get as close to the edge as possible just for the sake of being on the edge.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and so like you mentioned earlier, you've spent some time in edgelord communities, so have I, and I think we both still have pretty fringe beliefs.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not
yeah.
it's not like you were like, oh, I spent some time in the edgelord community and they showed me how stupid and dumb edginess is, and now I no longer have those fringe beliefs. It's like they kind of showed me how not to espouse um and communicate
Yeah,
the
exactly.
fringe beliefs.
I learned how not to communicate. And I um and I was in communities that I don't think would describe themselves as edge lords, right? I
Mhm.
Some of them would. I I was part of communities like the Satanic Temple that are very sincere in their beliefs, and I was extremely sincere in their beliefs. Uh, and But what ended up happening is that the I started to realize that the way I was communicating was not conducive to the ends that I wanted, right?
Mhm.
And that if I really wanted to create a world of pluralism,
Yeah.
then acceptance of religious pluralism and that kind of stuff, that I had to be a bit more strategic. I had to lean into de-escalation, and I think that was the main point of change for me, is looking at the landscape that we're living in and being like, what we need right now is de-escalation,
Yeah.
rhetorically. And in community we need de-escalation, even between people who have very, very, very different beliefs. Like,
Right.
I need to do my part to stop this rocket of acrimony
Yes.
just going into the stratosphere. Like, I need to do my part to slow that down. And I started to feel like I wasn't doing my part in that. And that actually what I was doing was directly enabling the escalation. Um, and so, it's funny that you say that, we still have fringe beliefs. I think my temperament is actually quite moderate now.
Hmm.
I would say that my temperament is really kind of that of a normie, why can't we all get along lib.
Yeah.
But I try to be thoughtful about that, and I try to be intelligent about that. um
Well, I mean, I want to get back into, okay, I think that people are going to want to know. You said I spent some time with the Satanic Temple, and a lot of
yeah.
your readers know about that, but people who are seeing you for the first time are going to be like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, they're going to be like, what the fuck? Yeah,
Okay, so
I've
it
spent.
and so I
Yeah.
would like you to explain, going back to that comment, what um you were talking about the sincere beliefs. So I would like you to describe as best you can what these sincere beliefs were that brought you to that organization, and whether, if and whether you still hold some of those, or how that's changed since you left.
Yeah, absolutely. um okay, big topic. I really went straight from Christianity to the Satanic Temple,
Hmm.
and this was around 2017. And so I've spent close to a decade explaining this to people.
Yeah.
um and a lot of the values that led me to the Satanic Temple, I still carry, but they're being manifested in a different way. And I've also, in some ways, moved on ideologically from the temple, and I'm in a different place, and we can talk about that eventually as well. But um, the main thing that led me to the temple, and this is really important to understand about Satanism, what I would call mainline Satanism, is that I was losing my faith as a Christian.
Hmm.
I could no longer accept the supernatural claims as fully and easily as I could. And so there was this kind of hard atheist skeptic inside of me. And but then on the other hand, there was this part of me that really valued religion, that I am a deeply religious person. Um, I hesitate to say that I'm a deeply spiritual person. I think that, but I do think that I am a deeply religious person.
Okay.
And I, and so I still needed and valued the the communal and structural and symbolic and ritualistic aspect of religion, even as I even as my faith was dying. And you know, the thought that I kept having when I was in the church was, I can do Christianity. I just really struggle with believing Christianity. Now,
Mm.
but the thing is, Christianity is a creedal faith,
Yes.
right? It is a creedal faith for good or for ill, and so belief is very important. And then I discovered the temple, the satanic temple, and Satanism in general. And um, it is non-theistic, right?
Hmm.
They do not believe in a literal Satan. They do not believe in a literal God. They believe that these are powerful metaphors and symbols that can help structure our lives. So those are two really important things to know about what I would call mainline Satanism. Number one, they're non-theistic. They aren't worshiping a literal devil. And two, they the Satan, particularly the Satan of the Satanic Temple, is not necessarily the Satan of the Bible, in my view. It is the Satan of the Romantic poets. It is the Satan that started with Paradise Lost, and
Hmm.
then over the centuries, um, radicals and revolutionaries and poets took the symbol of Satan from Paradise Lost, because you know Satan is the most interesting character in Paradise Lost.
Oh, yeah.
He is the most fascinating and compelling
Yeah.
character in that book. Um,
Mhm.
and they took him as the symbol, you know, Byron and Shelley and so on, and then Anatole France later at the turn of the century. They took the symbol of Satan as the unbowed will rising up against insurmountable odds. But a really important part of that narrative is that Satan is also the ultimate outsider. Satan is the one who speaks for the outsider, and he is the eternal outsider. And the outsider is always scary
Yeah.
in every time and place. You know, the outsider is always very, very scary. And so Satanism, in my view, leans into that outsider status. And that really resonated with me because I grew up gay in the church and I always felt demonized.
Hmm.
And maybe not literally, although there were times when I believed that I was literally demonized for being gay, but socially demonized,
Yeah.
socially outcast, socially other. And so this has been a deep feeling of alienation that has been carried with me through most of my life, and I still have it, right? And so the symbol of Satan, it was very easy for me to look at the character of Satan in a literary and spiritual sense. Hold on, a cat wants out. Out you go. All right. Um, it was very easy for me to look at a literary Satan and see him as the hero because
Yeah.
I really identified with that outsider status rising up against insurmountable odds. Um, the Satanic Temple, in particular, has a number of core beliefs that I would describe as Enlightenment values, free speech being one, a very libertarian ethos. It has seven tenets, and one of those tenets is the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego one's own. Um, One should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Uh, the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. One's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone, and they go on. Right now, a lot of those beliefs, some of them have been tempered, but I still really hold on to those core values of
Mm-hmm.
compassion, empathy, justice. Um, they've they've just been reframed, and we can get into an interesting conversation of how they might in fact just be Christianity and goth clothing, right?
Yeah.
That is another interesting conversation to have. um, but I'm still the same person
Mm-hmm.
who was initially drawn to Satanism. And I also, here's the important thing, I think that religious communities are also kind of like neurotribes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just about what you believe, it is also about how you think. It is also about your temperament and your personality and how you see the world. And I think that the Satanic Temple is a sort of neurotribe, and Satanism in general is a sort of neurotribe where it attracts weird people who see things inverted, who can look at the symbol of Satan despite the entire history of that being the most terrifying personification of evil, and look at Satan and just immediately get the idea that, like, oh, that guy's the good guy. That
Yeah.
takes a very weird mind, right?
Right.
And so that is like the key in the lock that opens the door to a really weird club where people have kind of the same types of minds.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have that same type of mind. I still have that weirdo thing, that where things arrive inverted for me.
Yeah.
And um so a lot of my temperament is the same, a lot of my values are the same. I would just say that I have become more I have leaned more into the values of mutual respect, of of de-escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've also just become more, for lack of a better term, more conservative than I was.
Yeah.
I was a very, 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 very far leftist.
Mm-hmm.
Now I would say that I am more moderate. And that set me at odds with some of my colleagues, and not just in the temple, but in a number of leftist spaces and LGBT spaces. And so yeah, that that can serve as an introduction.
Okay. I'm gonna do my edgelord experience real quick.
Your
So
edgelord credentials.
yeah, my edgelord credentials. Okay. So my experience was in the anarcho-capitalist slash voluntarist movement. I still would readily describe myself as a voluntarist. This
Mm-hmm.
is a person who believes that all human interaction should be consensual,
Yes.
and recognizes the fact that the very existence of a state or a government as we know it is antithetical to the to that happening. We can never have all human interactions be consensual as long as there is an authority um, dispensing permissions, telling us what to do, making regulations on human behavior, and taxing transactions, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
Um, so when I say to people that I am anarchist, mostly they are probably picturing like a black flag, Antifa, or
Mm-hmm.
a communist, sort of like a syndicalist or something like that. And that's not me. It never really, I did spend a brief amount of time with the very lefty anarchist crowd when I was like 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
But most of my anarchist history has been with the more we might call centrist and right-leaning
Hmm.
anarchists. Right-leaning anarchists are usually, I would say, most of them are anarcho-capitalist. That's how they would describe themselves. There is, and this is not just it's not just a title that people apply to themselves. There's actually a vast um, amount of philosophical and economic scholarship that
Hmm.
has gone into the development of this school of thought. And there are branches of it, different branches, which I won't go into. Um, so, an anarcho capitalist is a person who is anarchist and also favors a capitalist economic system. I still am, I would favor a capitalist economic system over a communist one. Um,
Same.
it feels like the evidence is in that capitalism brings more prosperity and ease to more people's lives than communism does. But I wouldn't, I no longer class myself as an anarcho-capitalist just because that's where the edgelordism took me, where I was like, wait a minute, these guys are just being edgy for the sake of being edgy a lot of times. And uh you get into these spaces and it's just like your experience with the Satanic Temple. It just attracts all the because it's on the edge. It attracts all these different people who are in one way or another on the edge. And some of them are um experiencing mental illnesses that in their rejection of modern society, they're not seeking treatment for or not seeking diagnosis for. Some of them you know, are just grabbing at anything that's anti mainstream, just to make themselves as not normie as possible. And then there are others who are like sincere. Um, they really believe in the premises and the they really believe in what the philosophy espouses. And these are the people that are like, let's do this and let's do that. And they're full of energy and they want to do projects and they want to evangelize the normies. And then something happens and it could be a current event or their favorite anarchist, their favorite edgelord goes off the deep end and goes a different direction or something, and then they start to become disillusioned with the philosophy. Maybe this wasn't, maybe these people weren't really being honest. Maybe this philosophy doesn't actually work. And what typically happens in a lot of those cases is you have them going to another edgelord camp.
Yeah.
Once they become disillusioned, I've seen this so many times. I've seen people in the voluntarist crowd get disillusioned with voluntarism, decide that it doesn't work, it can never work, and become like Trump supporters
Yes.
or communists or something. Like
Yeah.
they could go in either direction because really they were just, they recognized that the system that we live in is ridiculous and that they have to look on the edges for something better. And then once they find something better on the edges, they put all their faith and hope into it and then gradually realize that it doesn't have all the answers either. And so they have to go and find another thing on the edge. Um,
Yes.
so for me, what I've come to realize is that I am still very much a voluntarist, and I say anarchist to people because they don't know what voluntarist is. And anarchist is more of a, you know, understandable term for people who are unfamiliar than voluntarist. But like I I to me the philosophical premise of voluntarism, that human interaction should be consensual and that it is unacceptable to commit aggression against a peaceful person, are very much like heartfelt, strong, central. Like that's what my whole social political programming runs off of. That it's a strong central code, you know. But I also understand now, where I didn't when I was younger and more naive, that everybody isn't ever going to be ready for that. And part
Yes.
of part of part of having human interactions be consensual is to let the people who are not ready to consent to freedom and responsibility have their, you know, their system, their state run system, and understand that as I'm in the minority of people who would like to, have freedom and accept freedom and responsibility, that all I can do is do it, to the best of my ability in my realm of control within the wider system. So that doesn't mean that I'm going off and I'm like, oh, I'm going to change the system from the inside. I just accept that the system exists and I can't do anything to make it not exist. And I do my best to live a life that honors consensual interactions and non aggression.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are several things in there that I think are really important. The with the last thing that you said, I think that's really important because what I find more radical movements really struggle with is the question, well, what do we do in the meantime?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And by that take a lot of leftist people um who believe that capitalism is the worst thing ever and is destroying humanity and that we really need to tear it down. Okay,
Yeah.
capitalism is not going to come down overnight. Okay, what do we do in the meantime?
Right.
It's the meantime
Mm-hmm.
that is often missing from that analysis. And same with, but what you're saying is that you're pointing to, I think, a reality that requires moderation for a lot of people, because the meantime is a fundamentally nuanced, messy thing that requires restraint and moderation.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that piece. Um, and I think the same is true for me, where there's what I believe ought to be the case, but then there's the reality that we live with.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, what comes to mind is how in the Satanic Temple would do something that I think was really quite brilliant, which was a community would or our society espouses religious freedom, and evangelicals would put up 10 commandments on government property, which are free speech spaces, um, and TST would come along and say something to the effect of, "Oh, this is great. We also support religious freedom. We're going to put our 10-foot tall bronze." Our 10-foot tall bronze Baphomet statue right next to your 10 Commandments as a celebration of religious pluralism and free speech.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is something really brilliant about that, right? The thing, the thing is, though, the thing is, people, I believe, interpret symbolic threats as equal to physical threats on a deep level,
Yeah.
right? And I could wish that that's not the case, and
Yeah.
that this kind of extreme act of provocation, this extreme act of provocation that is heartfelt that is sincere and a sincere representation of my values, I could wish that people did not have that glitch. I don't have it as much, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And I have to live with the cards that I am given. I have to work with the cards that I'm given in this society. And also there are deeply religious people who believe that Baphomet on that a Satan statue on government property is a matter of spiritual life and death for the future of this country and their children and their spiritual lives and their supernatural security in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And here I come along and I fuck with that. I could wish all I want that that's not the case and that people will just see the intention behind what something like the Satanic Temple is doing, but they
Yeah.
don't.
They
Okay, so
don't.
what do we do in the meantime? What do we do in the meantime where we are surrounded by people who, for whom these supernatural beliefs are just, there's no seam between their supernatural beliefs and how they live their lives and their view of government. As much as
Mm-hmm.
I want to say there should be that division between sacred and secular, between religion and secular, other people don't have that. Okay, what do I do in the meantime with that? Well, what that means is I need to be much more skillful and moderate and respectful and practice a lot of cognitive empathy to understand where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm much better at that. And also, I have to clarify, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Satanic Temple. To be clear, I am only sharing my personal interpretation
Yeah.
of what the Satanic Temple did and how I personally experienced it. That's a very important caveat that I have to give.
Yeah.
Because the Satanic Temple is a very diverse community. There's there's one more thing that I want to bring up that you said. You brought up mental illness in the context of edgelordism.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I've become very aware of is how, so I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That's something I write about quite a bit. Looking over my life and seeing just how much my thought, my personality, the communities that I associate with are informed by that filter
Yeah.
of living between extremes.
Yeah.
And it even goes down to like the title of my Substack, which is Sacred Tension. It's
Right.
like the tension between those highs and the lows, those tensions between the extremes. And that was one of the things that attracted me to Satanism, especially the Satanic Temple, which really has the reconciliation of opposites, is central to the temple. And so for me, it's taken me a long time to realize, like, oh, for me, my what I need to work on is more of the not vacillating between
Yeah.
extremes, not going to the furthest edge, but instead trying to find a sustainable reconciliation,
Yeah.
because that is also what I'm having to do cognitively with my mood, or with my emotions and my moods all the time,
Yeah.
right? That But it's been really startling to kind of look through my history and realize, oh my God, so much of my thinking, so much of my politics, so much of my communities that I associate with, so much of that is informed or filtered by my mental illness.
Yes. Okay. Great job explaining that.
Yeah,
Can you give a okay, we have to I was gonna let this go an hour, but I actually have to leave in 15-ish minutes. And so we're gonna cut it a little bit short.
sure.
And I do want to hear your experience about leaving the Satanic Temple. Like you don't have to do the whole
Yeah,
novel, but
yeah, yeah. And yeah. So it was painful.
hmm
It was extremely painful because it was my community, it was my religious practice, it was my belief system, and I poured a lot of my time and work into this thing. And so it was a loss of religion, and for me it was a very sincere religion. You know, people ask me, well, is it a troll or is it a religion? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Right, it's both. And for me it was sincere, and the kind of provocativeness came from a very sincere place of a place of real belief. And um but in a word, it was very painful, and it kind of fucked up my life for a while.
Hmm.
And I think the hardest thing about it, I'll just comment on one particular aspect, which was I didn't know how to behave
Yeah.
in the real world, or among normies, right? Because
Hmm.
I was used to being the most conservative person in the room in these spaces, and not just in the Satanic Temple, but in a lot of, very, very far lefty LGBT spaces, right? I
Hmm.
was used to being kind of the more temperate person in the
Yeah.
room, or the more conservative person in the room. Suddenly, I was the most radical person in the room. I was the most bizarre person in the room. And so I felt really like I had lost a home of weirdos who
Hmm.
where I was very comfortable being surrounded by people who had very unusual lifestyles, when compared to the norm, who were very alternative in their lifestyles and their aesthetic and their beliefs. Right, I was very comfortable there. But what I came to understand, oh, I will get to that point in a moment. When I like re-entered civilian life and walked away from all of that, and my beliefs started to change, and I would say started to turn more towards maybe a more traditional form of religion, and I started to become more of a normie. I really struggled with knowing what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate, and how to communicate and how to talk to people. And because
Hmm.
I had been surrounded by such a bizarre and extreme community for so long.
Yeah.
And that was really hard. um
Well, why were you leaving in the first place?
so I left because I felt like it no longer was meeting my spiritual needs, for one.
Hmm.
I felt like I was no longer aligned with the goals of the temple,
Hmm.
and I felt like I was burned out as well. I was burned out. I was no longer aligned with the views of the temple. I was no Satanism no longer satisfied my spiritual needs, and I realized I needed something deeper. I needed something more fulfilling.
Hmm.
I needed something more rooted in, um, yeah, in a deeper spirituality. And so I
Yeah.
started to find myself drawn to Buddhism. I found myself starting to be drawn to Stoicism, even modern Stoicism. And I found myself being drawn back to Christianity.
Hmm.
Um, and looking at the person of Christ and just being like, I really love this. I cannot deny that I love this. And so I started to feel misaligned with the political methods of TST. And I really felt this when TST opened their abortion clinic and called it Sam Alito's Mom Satanic Abortion Clinic.
Yeah.
And I laughed
Hmm.
at first, and then I thought about it, and I was like, I just don't know if this is what the world needs.
Yeah.
I feel like this is escalating our culture war. I want to de escalate this. I am fundamentally in a different I just have fundamentally different methods now. So there was a lot that went into that change.
Yeah.
It was a long journey, and I think I'm one of the very few people who has had the honor of deconstructing both Christianity and Satanism back to back.
Congratulations.
Thank
I
you.
mean, that's
Speaking of being a weirdo.
yeah. Um, yeah, wow. That could I remember when we met for coffee, we talked about that and I kept thinking about it the rest of the day and I was like, that is I mean, you talked earlier about your life being like bipolar and swinging back from
Yes.
one extreme to another. To not only have been Christian and then satanic and then interested in Christianity again, but also to have been deconstructing from Christianity and then deconstructing from Satanism. And now I guess I don't want to label what you're doing now, but that is really quite a life experience, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's been wild. And I'm now cultivating a lot more privacy with my religious
Mhm.
life, and I'm also being very careful to not assign a label to it, because I do think that one of my big mistakes was over identifying
Yeah,
with a religious community that got my interest.
right.
That, and so now I'm very, so now I'll develop an interest in a particular religious path, or a particular religious community. And now I have two rules, which is, one, don't write about it immediately.
Mhm.
Provide myself some privacy to just let this thing grow, to
Mhm.
not overexpose it. And then two, to be really cautious with labels and to keep my identity small. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like there is that tendency or yearning for people who for us weirdos and people who never quite fit in, um to find a community and be like, I've found the weirdos who believe
Yeah,
everything I
totally.
do. And then slowly, gradually, you realize, no, this is still a group of divergent weirdos that all have their own beliefs and own agendas and different ways of seeing what we're doing and goals and worldviews. And and ultimately you find yourself alone again.
Yep.
And then hopefully as you mature and develop and you're walking your path, you realize being alone is the human experience,
Yes.
and that's part of what makes us all relate to each other, you know what I mean? So
100%.
we're all alone together, we're all
Yes,
alone in this together, Stephen.
absolutely. And let me and may I make one last point, and I'll make it really fast.
Sure.
Um I am now extremely cautious around communities for which outsiderness is central.
Mm-hmm.
And because I what that does, be it various LGBT communities, or various religious or spiritual communities, or alternative communities, et cetera, what that does is it sends a bat signal to the entire world saying, if you're weird, come to us, we will accept you. But the thing is, outsiders, as you pointed out, are often struggling with some mental health challenges. They've some of them have had very hard lives, and that manifests in how they relate to people. I am not exempt from any of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of those communities are extremely acrimonious and are very painful and very aggressive to each other, and it's just not a fun place to be. It's just not a comfortable place to be. And what I found is that I need a community that is based on principles rather than being an outsider, right? And
Yeah.
I need something that is based on living the virtues, living a life of character and integrity. And what does that look like in the world?
Right.
That for me now need if and when I engage in communities, that needs to be the heart of it rather than being an outsider, because those communities based on integrity, based on we're going to live the good life together and figure out what
Yeah.
that means, those attract a completely different type of person.
Yes.
And so I say this as an outsider. I am now extremely suspicious of communities that are based solely on being outsiders.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would add that it's the same type of suspicion that I hold for communities that find themselves based on their institutionality.
Yes.
It's two different extremes of what communities can be based on, but they're suspicious for kind of the same reason.
Yes.
It's because they're, instead of being focused on principle, on, goodness, virtue, truth, they're focused on what it means to be a part of, or like what they're they're focused on. Either they're focused on the wrong thing.
Yes.
The
100%.
group itself, they become focused on maintaining, the institutions become focused on maintaining their own existence.
Yeah. It's the iron law of institutions. The iron law of institutions is an institution eventually starts to focus on its own preservation and its own ends rather than the stated goals of the institution.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Maybe
This is
we
great.
might, I loved it. We might have a part two of this, but if not, we'll definitely have other discussions at another time.
Yeah, for sure. We'll do it.
All right. Have a good
All
day.
right.
Thanks for
Yes. Thank you
joining.
so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.